¿Está listo?
No,
Es que viene ahora.
no. No, que necesitan el video ahora y no está listo el video ahora.
Well, it's not deactivated now.
It's not.
Well, he disconnected it.
I don't know use PC. I think it's copy and this. Where is the?
What?
I need the copy. Yes, please. Yes. Ah, okay. Yeah. Thanks. Ya. ¿Puedes chequearla ahora?
Ya, el video. Tenemos que meter a otro panelista.
El video se va a copiar.
Ya.
No, todavía no, pero. Ya. Ok.
Dice que no se escucha. Pablo.
Oye, pero Pablo dice que no se escucha. Pablo dice que no se escucha. Estoy seguro que me está entrando por el Zoom, escuchándolo por el Zoom.
Te escucháis tú. Te escucháis tú.
Dice que me escucho yo, dice, en la transmisión. Está entrando.
Te escucháis tú.
Pablo dice que no se escucha. Pablo dice que no se escucha. Captura de nuevo. Captura.
They have the possibility to make this linkage, these bridges between administration, private sector, civil society, and so on. But Francisca and also Mary, to have an efficient philanthropy, we should think about three aspects from my side. First, the philanthropy should have capacity to install excellent governance. It is not about mobilizing money. It is also about excellent, demonstrate excellent governance of all the aspects. To be an excellent philanthropy, you need to have this two dimension, time scales and also segmentation scales. Time scales, as you said, it is about not now, it is about how we can plan in the future, how we can ensure that the roadmaps are well established. The other dimension, which is segment marketing scale, is how we to deal with all the population interested with these three crises. Indigenous people, youth, gender, and all the aspects that create this diversity, this inclusivity. And I think, let me conclude by something which is really important. There is no mobilization without benefit. And this is sometimes when we are looking to climate change, it is a sort of climate change. And philanthropy can transform
our mitigation and adaptation measure, and also the fact that we need to include the gender and exist people in civil society. I don't know if Ricardo, if the video is ready. Can we display the video of Mrs. Leka and of Mr. Blondo? We don't have the sound yet. Louder.
No?
I think we have an issue with the sound. What? I think we need to replay again the video to be able to listen. So if the video is not ready, we can pass to the next panelist and then we display again. So I'm going to give you the floor, Valerie. Valerie, very welcome. You are the Global Director of Environment Development at World Bank. Prior to that, you were manager for advisory and operations in the climate change group, where you oversaw the implementation of the World Bank's commitment on climate change, climate mainstreaming, and climate finance. And before that, the practice manager for EMD in Latin America and the Caribbean, where you manage a cross-sectoral team that support countries and communities on issues related to climate change, sustainable forest management, integrated conservation and development, integrated coastal zone management, fishery pollution management, and environmental health, environmental economy, and environmental.
Where, of course, philanthropy continues to be an important part of putting money on the table, putting more money on the table. The solution to the climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis, the pollution crisis is going to come through domestic public budgets. That's where the bulk of money is always going to be. But philanthropy plays a role in the quality of money, specifically when it comes to the two issues of access and access is really important. One of the conversations we had in Cali, Colombia at the Biodiversity COP just a couple of weeks ago, the conversation is here. We'll take this conversation with us to the UNCCD COP in Saudi Arabia in a few weeks, is the idea of how do we make sure we get money to the families, to the communities, and to the companies who are actually doing action on the ground, so that the money doesn't stay at international levels, it doesn't even stay at national level, but it gets to the players on the ground. And philanthropy, because of what we heard from so many speakers, from Francisca, from Ruth, from everybody, is able to take risk, is able to be patient capital, can invest in organizations without needing to see immediate results, can invest in local and regional civil society, adaptation will never have the same commercial rates of return that mitigation has. So it's going to have to be public finance, it's going to have to be philanthropic funding, and it's going to have to be done with local, regional organizations. Because adaptation projects, the success of them will move at the speed of trust. And only local organizations have the local knowledge, the local know-how, and the local networks to actually inspire action that sticks. And philanthropy can play a role. Too often right now, we have a huge amount of intermediation in the climate crisis where big conservation, big climate, all the big NGOs play a role in getting engaged everywhere. And those are important institutions. But they're institutions that don't have people on the ground everywhere, particularly at the rural frontier, at the coastal frontier, where climate change is ravaging people's livelihoods and people's lives. So really having philanthropy work at that space is going to be important. But access is not just about who gets money, it's about how quickly the money can move. And you heard this from Abdullah. Speed is of the essence, and moving money more quickly. But not just moving it more quickly, which is something philanthropy can do, but moving money as a bridge. You've heard that word from everybody on this stage. And especially when we see a problem where international public finance, whether it's World Bank projects, whether it's GEF projects, whether it's GCF projects, tend to have a boom and bust cycle. There's a project and then there's a gap, and then there's a follow-on project. In that gap, results are being washed away. And that, again, is another role philanthropy can play as that bridge financing to ensure that the results that are produced by international public financing don't disappear when the project goes away, but can be sustained while the next project finance cycle is being prepared. So access matters, but so does impact. And here's where philanthropy, again, can take the kind of risk and experiment where international public finance cannot experiment. We don't have the same risk calibration. And that becomes important, especially, for example, when we talk about nature-based solutions, where we need to experiment, because too often today, nature-based solutions are a Trojan horse for conservation as usual. We don't know if they're actually producing climate adaptation results. And philanthropy can experiment in this space, which is really important. And so philanthropy plays such an important role, both in terms of access and impact. But there's one more thing that philanthropy can do that none of the rest of us are doing that I think is absolutely vital. And that's build understanding through supporting local media. We live in a world of climate change that is incredibly full of jargon. All of us have been in this world for dozens of years. We speak a completely different language than everyday people. And the media are the people who have to translate what goes on in international events like this, what is going on at climate cabinets in every country, what's going on in climate legislation to everyday people. And yet the media aren't often given the kind of capacity building and the support they need. And that's a role that I would call on philanthropy to play increasingly, to support local and national media to understand the triple environmental crisis, to be able to translate what's happening for people so that that social mobilization we need can be brought about based on and built on facts and understanding of what's actually happening. So I think if we start working on all of that together, philanthropy can make a huge difference. But I want to finish on something I hope philanthropy can stop doing, which is we live in a world where there's either too much data or not enough data. Too many standards or not enough standards, and we have a huge fragmentation. And too often philanthropy, not just philanthropy, every pot of money is adding to this fragmentation by funding new sets of standards, by funding new institutions to collect more data. What we need to do is work against that fragmentation. And again, I would ask philanthropy to not fund new data collection unless you know the data has not already been collected. Not to fund new standards unless you know those standards don't already exist. Because if we don't fight against fragmentation, then that capital confusion I talked at the beginning means that no matter how much money is at play, that money is not going to be fighting what it needs to fight, and it's going to be wasted. Thank you.
Thank you, Valerie. I just noticed that I think it's a really interesting comment in order to avoid to financial things that already exist. And we have discussed many times with Francisca the fact that there is a lot of duplicity of actions from the philanthropy, and it's certainly a challenge through the philanthropy. So I don't know if finally we can have the video of the chair of the Fellows from then with the proper audio. Do you think so? Yes? Okay. So now we are going to display the video. Yes? No? Ricardo? If not, we go to the next panelist because let me know. Oh, okay. We don't have sound. Okay, we are going to the next panelist, hoping that next time it's going to be fine. So the next panelist is through Zoom. I don't know, Ricardo, if Patricia Ricard is okay and she's ready through Zoom. Karen, can you tell us if Patricia Ricard is okay? Patricia Ricard through Zoom is there. She's the next panelist. No? No, apparently we cannot have the Zoom participation. That's a pity because Patricia Ricard, the new Patriots of Nature, was really enjoying to participate to this panel. We hope that she's there even through line and she could maybe participate later. So our next panelist is Stewart Maginis, UCN Deputy Director General. Stewart has been described as the father of the nature-based solution. He has worked in conservation and sustainable development for over 37 years, one third of which has been spent doing full-time field work in Tanzania, Sudan, Ghana, and Costa Rica. Since 2008, he has played a leading role in the conceptual development and promotion of nature-based solutions, a socially equitable framework for the management and restoration of natural resources, has a direct contribution to some of the world's most pressing sustainable development challenges. He has also led UCN's work on the development of the global standard for nature-based solution, which helps, as we know, get users through NBS application and some benchmark for the progress. Stewart, thank you for being here. We give you the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Patricia. And thanks very much to the organisers. Thanks to Corte Stellare and to Velux and Velux Foundation WMO for organising this. So I'll try and build on actually a couple of the comments that have been said already. And actually, like Valerie, there's obviously there is a role for philanthropy in plugging the gap or filling the gap. But I think actually again that there are some other really critical elements, and I want to go back to the issue of the triple planetary crisis or the polycrisis, however one wants to describe that. It's not just that there are 2, 3, 4 crises, it's that they're actually interrelated. And the very fact is we actually have been trying to pursue solutions, and we still tend to pursue solutions that are fragmented and siloed. And I mean, we've seen this actually since COP29. We've recognised the interrelated nature of the biodiversity loss crisis and the climate crisis, and therefore we need to have more integrated approaches, including but not restricted to things like nature-based solutions. But that's easier said than done, and I do think there's a real challenge often with public sector funding to be able to respond to how you put in place a more integrated approach to to this. So I'm going to focus more on what I think are the real value-added roles of philanthropy, and that is, and I think it comes down to, you mentioned that it's to the agility of philanthropy on how it can actually respond to complement and to not to fill funding gaps, but to fill the response gaps that we may not be able to see as quickly with public sector funding. And I'm going to actually just take this really describe this a little bit from IUCN's own experience. So I would say there are 4 areas where philanthropy can really fill key gaps. One, notwithstanding what you're saying about data, but there is still knowledge gaps. We talk about the finance gap to implement, but there definitely is on the ground, there is a knowledge gap as well that is required. There is also, I would say, an innovation gap as well. How can we, in a very agile way, test new ideas, explore those opportunities, and critically, I think, often build the radical partnerships, because it's not just going to be done, these innovation won't be done by trying to do the same thing again and again by the same organization. It's how do we build new and exciting radical partnerships. Collaborators who normally wouldn't actually get together to test ideas. There is the issue, and it's been touched on again, on leverage and where we can actually leverage other funding. And then finally, there is the issue of what I would call inclusive outreach. How do we actually get knowledge out from a small subset of individuals to a broader constituency on which they can act? So I'm sort of going to build a little bit on this over the next couple of minutes on sort of IUCN's experience. Philanthropy in IUCN's portfolio is about 7%. So again, I want to come back, it's not just about the issue of filling the financing gap, it's really filling these other gaps, the innovation gap, the knowledge gap. But it is, I would say, it's much more, its value is more than 7%. It has played a real catalytic role in IUCN, working with our members, our 1,400 members, and our 17,000 scientists across the 7 expert commissions in really driving the generation of knowledge and innovation. And so it is, and every time you look at this, you see where the difficult to fund issues is where we actually see philanthropy step in. I just want to I'll give you one example on this here where I think we are really trying to build some innovation. So, of course, we all want to see a rapid move to renewables. We want to see there's the ambition to get to increase that capacity threefold by 2030. But the challenge is, and it comes back to this issue again, do we solve one problem at a time? Do we exacerbate 3 or 4 problems in the wake of trying to fix one problem, or do we try and move forward? So we have been working with a group, with transmission service operators, who I will admit, I hadn't even heard of transmission service operators about 5 years ago, but the people who run grids, electricity grids. And so and through a body called the Renewable Grids Initiative, which brings several of these TSOs together. So we were working with them to try and set up a new initiative that when we see renewables roll out, it is not just renewables, but that those renewables are also nature positive. Because we do know that there can be real impacts on that. So we had an interesting idea. I'd say we had a radical partnership, but it was really, again, the proposition was a challenge to get resourcing from more traditional sources. So it was the Orca Foundation, or the Orca Alliance, who are a mix of several philanthropic foundations, Bloomberg, Gordon and Betty Moore, the Oak Foundation, Packet Foundation, and ORCA is the Ocean Resilience and Climate Alliance. And they were the ones who said, okay, right, this is an interesting idea. We will support you to take that. So there's always, I think the other thing is it's innovating, taking a risk on how you can actually support that sort of engagement. We have, our knowledge products, we obviously critically, we've got the red list of threatened species. But one of the issues you mentioned, Valerie, was actually reaching out. How do we get that? The red list of threatened species is held is 60 years old this year. It is a deep data set. 166,000 species have been assessed, millions of data points, but it's very much held and known about within organisations like the bank, some government departments. But how do you actually then use the knowledge in that to actually reach out and engage with a much wider constituency? We as scientists, I'll be honest, we don't have that expertise. So we worked with the ANT group and with their foundation to try and innovate a new platform that can actually reach out to civil society more broadly. Last week alone, we had 50 million citizens engage with this platform on red list, on issues around species extinction, starting to understanding the data and knowledge that's in the red list, but in a way that becomes much more accessible. Again, something we wouldn't regularly do with conventional resources that we get from bilaterals or multilaterals. On the other issue with on knowledge is obviously we've got the red list of threatened species, but we've got very, very little knowledge still from a globally systematic framing on the risk of ecosystem collapse. And so several years ago we started to initiate the red list of ecosystems, which in the same way to the red list of threatened species actually systematically can assess how close an ecosystem or an ecosystem type is to collapse. We built a lot of the building up of the structures, the engineering behind that was driven by philanthropic input from the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation. We've now actually started to systematically do those assessments. We've just done an assessment, a global assessment of the risks facing mangroves, and that again has been driven by philanthropic funding. So I'll come back and just sort of keep reinforcing this point that I think there is a real niche that philanthropic funding can play that actually allows us to bring together a much more integrated perspective on how one addresses these interrelated crises, and critically helps add value by generating knowledge, filling knowledge gaps, and getting that knowledge to a broader range of stakeholders by helping to promote innovation and develop up new and innovative and what I would call radical partnerships to drive that, and finally by being able to leverage and build on other sources of financing so that one can actually spread the impact and value of new initiatives and new funds. And maybe in the interest of time, I will leave it at that, Patricia. Thank you.
Thank you very much to remember us as the kind of project that we can do through this and how we can help, and also the need of more information in the university. Now we are going to give the floor to our last panelist, David Andrews, Information Officer of Convention of Political Diversity. David is the Information Officer for the CBD and the focal point for the United Nations Decade of Biodiversity. He led the team that developed and implemented the marketing campaign for the International Year of Biodiversity in 2010. David's works include support to the identification and creation of indicators and public awareness in the university and its value to human livelihood, which is very important considering what we already discussed. He has been with the Secretariat since 2003, working on a variety of communication campaigns, including the annual campaign for the International Day for Biodiversity. You're very welcome, Amy. Thank you for this.
Great, thank you very, very much. So it's a delight to be here. I've had a few days to rest from finishing COP29 for the Convention of Biological Diversity in Cali. So I can look at this setting and this panel discussion with a little bit of rest, but in light of some of the results that we've had in Cali. As I come near the end, so much has already been said, so I have to rewrite everything I was going to say and sort of take into account what's here. I think what's been good for me to hear from this panel is the special qualities of philanthropy that can allow it to play a special role, both in addressing the planetary crisis, and I'll talk a little bit. I'm going to talk a little bit about the need to integrate, not just the climate crisis, but I'm also going to talk about the need to integrate philanthropy and its energies at national levels in some of the institutions we need for that. So just sort of zooming way back out, I mean, we talk about the triple planetary crisis, we're talking about pollution, we're talking about biodiversity loss, we're talking about climate change. And we've recognized under the CBD process that these are indeed interrelated and that everything we do under this process has got to have an effect and synergies with the others. If we don't solve the climate crisis, we're not going to solve the biodiversity crisis. But at the same time, if we don't solve the biodiversity crisis, we don't have the resources that we need to address climate issues. The line that we use under the convention is that 30% of the mitigation solutions under the Paris Accord can come from action that achieves goals under biodiversity. So it's fine for us to talk about synergies, but how have we practically made that happen? And under the convention process, our new Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework that was agreed a couple of years ago in Montreal, I believe it's got the basis to do that integration, because it's a framework that, while it does focus on the objectives of the convention, its 4 goals and 23 action targets, in fact, are radically cross-cutting and really bring in the elements of climate action, whether it's mitigation or adaptation, disaster risk reduction as well. So it's this whole framework that by countries addressing it will actually be able to move forward on all these different agendas, including the pollution agenda as well. So this framework, I think, is one of the bases to approach everything. And the minute that all actors, whether it's the climate process, whether it's governments, whether it's the philanthropic sector, look at it, it's a way to move forward. Now, the framework also includes addressing this funding gap. We talked about $700 billion is captured in our framework in terms of $700 billion what we need for what governments have agreed to cover to look at this. So I was struck that everybody says, well, money is not necessarily the problem, the number one problem for things. Although I think we would advocate that in the biodiversity space, I think we still do need to fill that gap with resources that can come from the philanthropic sector. So I think that's an important part. Although what I'm struck by in the panel is the notion that this sector has an agility, an ability to be novel, to be experimental in ways that other institutions can't. And I very much agree with that. I think that's very much the point. We've seen that in some of the work that Alex has done, the work that you have done with your foundation as well, and the way that other actors have moved forward. But I think part of the incorporation and integration we need to look at is, if we have that energy to be creative, how do we make sure that that creativity is going to the right places? And I think that comes down to something that's going to sound very bureaucratic, but which is really important, and it's the planning processes. So for us, under the convention, it's about the role of philanthropy in the national biodiversity strategies action plans. So if we're going to mobilize the philanthropic sector in support of the convention, they need to be involved in these processes. It's a key part for the convention. These aren't just processes where maybe 15 years ago the governments wrote a document and put it together. These are consultative processes that bring together all actors. And I think my argument is going to be is we need to make sure that the philanthropic sector is at these processes at all national levels. And that's the way that you can capture this dynamism of the sector, so that they've got the agility, they know what needs to happen at the national levels. Because these global targets I've just broadly just introduced to you, they have to have national expression. That's what it's being meaningful. And what I'm hearing from the panel here is that the philanthropic sector could respond to these national grants. So, the thing I would say in our process is let's get all of these institutions in these processes so that they know where they can be and they can move forward. So that's under the process for our MBSAPs. Now, within the climate process, we need to look at how that could also be incorporated. But I think that's the one thing, is bring them in as full partners for that level as well. The other comment I would make too, and we start to see this, is that philanthropists have the opportunity to be very radically inclusive. And under the convention process, we recognize this. We know that Indigenous peoples and local communities are extremely important. We recognize that women and youth are important actors to be involved in this, not just the subjects of receiving money, but also involved in the process of deciding how it comes. And I think the philanthropies that are working in this area are a great way of leading the way, and this is where they should also be heading as well. So I think that's probably what I can contribute, is let's harness this creativity, this agility of them, by making sure they're part of this overall planning process and moving forward. Thanks very much.
Thank you for this very interesting presentation, David. I have a lot of questions from that, but first of all, I wish to give you all the thanks and open the discussion with the public. I don't know if you have some comments or questions that you would ask to our panelists in general to dig further in this discussion. So obviously, I open the floor. No, there is no question. So I'm just going to take your point, your last point, to open the discussion here. You mentioned, well, you all talk about trust, standards, planification, and that word that you mentioned, we need to understand the philanthropy institution, where we really need in order to avoid again the competition. And we were discussing yesterday with Francisca that Mary Foundation is an observer of the EPCC, and that journey with the EPCC started because of the trust that the Secretariat put on us. And this is the way that it started, and we started to work together with sometimes mistakes and then improving and so on. But it's certainly not something that it's very current and common. We believe in the UN, and also we know that there is a kind of tension in the governments. So maybe you are true that money is not the first problem. Maybe the first problem is the governance, not also in the governance and in the world sector. So what could we do in general, which would be the first step, let's say, genuinely to try to solve this? I don't know who won't try to give some beginning of answers.
I don't know if I have the answer. I was actually thinking about this when we were talking about it. And it is, so we went from the panel on filling the gap, maybe not of the public funding, because it's absolutely needed, but of potentially between projects or in the implementation gap, in the delivery, to joining a planning process at the national level, which actually leads to, it's playing in my mind, because where we think the trust and the build and accountability and transparency of a foundation, we need to be vetted against conflict of interest. There are foundations that are excellent and there are foundations that are not excellent. How we measure that, how this governance will take place at the national level, and what will be the vetting process of one against the other, how we will choose the ones that will join the table. So it is a very interesting aspect, and if we begin to do this too much, we will take the agility out of the process. So for me, I don't have an answer, but I'm beginning to think when you're saying about the planning process and how we can invite the foundations in the upstream planning process, because then the empowerment is there and you can be part of the actions. On the other hand, if we don't have a proper due diligence process at the international level or at the national level, how we can do that? We are facing this in UNEP. We want to work more with foundations, how we choose the foundations that we want to work with, and how they will choose us, of course, but we work with foundations from the tobacco sector, for instance, how we say yes or no to some of these things. And this is something I think it's important for us at the international level. But the more we do that, the less I think we contribute to the avoid of red tape in the process. And I think that there must be a balance in this process, because otherwise everybody does everything and there is a mix and confusion, as Valerie is saying, and I think we need to rethink this architecture of where the best of finance needs and finance means goes to what is needed. And I stick a little bit with adaptation, nature-based solutions, experiment, rather than other areas, because this is very difficult to be financed by other, at the moment, finance schemes.
No, thank you. I want to follow up on what David said and how Ruth followed up in terms of these global targets and global accords. Like the Paris Accord has to have national expression. Well, it does. It's national determined contribution. And so my suggestion would be that philanthropy needs to do what the rest of us need to do, which is look at the country-owned NDC and decide first, is this an NDC they want to support? And second, what part of it? Because I think it's important that countries are in the driving seat for deciding what they want, and the NDC is basically their wish list, their level of ambition and their level of action. And having the selectivity to say, these are the NDCs we want to support, and this part of those NDCs, and being transparent about that, I think not only helps that governance issue that you brought up, Patricia, but helps make sure that all of the various development actors who are supporting an NDC can avoid duplication. Because then philanthropy, through being selective, can help convene the other actors, sit down, and can draw out the supply chain of finance. Who's going to finance what parts? And that becomes very powerful, because then we can actually identify the gaps. We can actually reduce the duplication. And we can help a government understand how much help it's going to get in terms of realizing its ambition. But it's that selectivity and being transparent about which NDCs and what parts of those NDCs philanthropy will actually support, so that countries can see that this is a foundation we can work with on these issues for this many years. That kind of planning is important.
Maybe, Ariel, just build on what you were saying. I think you're right. There is a concern that we need to avoid duplication. But I think that needs to be balanced also with and I think this is where philanthropies can also come in significantly. Duplication, of course, we want to avoid, but the other thing is actually field repetition. And where we continue to do, one of the things I would suggest, perhaps with public sector funding, it's very difficult to learn the lessons of failure. And I think this is where actually, again, coming back to the agile nature of philanthropies, where we can have a much more honest look and say, right, integration is tough. If it was easy, we would be doing it already. We're much more comfortable working in our own silos and our own sectors. So when we try to step out, we are going to make mistakes. Let's recognize those, learn from those, put structures in place, have honest conversations. So I would also say that is a key role. I think because of the accountability, and understandable accountability requirements around public sector expenditure, it is always going to be a bit tougher to say, we really messed up there. Whereas I do think with philanthropies, they can create that learning space where we can then have, as I say, we may always duplicate some places, but we can at least, when we fail, we can really learn from that rather than be down to repeat it for another point. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Yes, Patricia said, IPCC trust you. Not only IPCC, when I am saying in the Secretariat, when you got status of observer, it is the panel who adopts you. And to be adopted by the panel of IPCC, you should demonstrate, many qualities. And qualities of trust, and you're right. And also not only trust, it is not trust, it is what are you bringing as added value to IPCC? Because it is about efficiency, it is about optimization. Let me I will use two aspects about my background as IT, because we are speaking about distributed activity. Because to achieve one task, you should well distribute the role. And IPCC is fulfilling many tasks, but the philanthropy are filling gaps, some tasks to be filled, and to come with complete work. It is like a team, it's like a football team. And each role is in one part. And philanthropy should play that role to complete the work. And I think this is complete the work. But what is really important this time, it is about the trust. IPCC, as you know, is working on voluntary basis. And the life of IPCC is also connected how all the parties, all government are trusting IPCC. Having you as observer organization should add in our trust. That means you also should demonstrate through your governance, your efficiency, that you are a good actor, an efficient actor, and clean actor properly. And this is how I think everybody, every institution should do this philanthropy. This is the way.
Gracias. Entonces, enfocándonos en la pregunta de cómo mejorar la participación de la filantropía en la Agencia de Naciones Unidas, en la agenda ambiental. Esa es la pregunta, ¿no es cierto?
Then focusing ourselves on the question about what is the role of philanthropy in the Agenda 2030 for United Nations.
Comentar de que igual me cuesta contestar esta respuesta.
For me, it's quite difficult to find an answer to this question.
He estado tratando de articularla, pero me cuesta.
I have been trying to find the right articulation for it, but it's still quite difficult.
Creo que hoy en día la filantropía no hace mucho tiempo está tomando un rol que es importante.
We have to say that philanthropy has been gaining these new roles since not so long ago.
Pero tal vez no se conoce el fondo real de lo que significa la filantropía y el cariño y el amor que lo que hay detrás.
Until now, we are having the point that it is not possible just to know philanthropy to the very end, and the love and the affection that the philanthropy is putting into all the work that is being done.
A veces, bueno, dicen que la filantropía finalmente está asociado también al dinero, obviamente, de la gente que puede donar ese dinero.
Although philanthropy is very much associated with the people that can donate money and how it can be done.
Pero insisto que no es el dinero, es mucho más que eso, porque la filantropía, por lo menos en mi caso, para lo que ha sido mi vida,
but I insist that it's not only about money. What I can say about my own personal experience, that it's a lot more than that.
es una responsabilidad,
That is a responsibility
es un propósito que
It's a
tengo
purpose
súper enraizado.
that I have in the very core of
Y lo otro
myself.
importante que sí creo que estamos en un problema grave.
But what I also believe is that we are in a very
¿Será
grave
que,
situation.
¿Será que falta a lo mejor que tal vez los filántropos tengamos mayor información?
What is also very important is that perhaps as philanthropists we need to have more information.
¿Será que a lo mejor tenemos que derribar ciertas barreras que existen también, políticas?
Perhaps we have also to turn down some political barriers that we are having as a
Que
philanthropist,
de repente hacen ciertas diferenciaciones.
which at some point make some differentiations.
among philanthropies and with the interactions with the government.
Yo hablo básicamente de lo que pasa en mi país porque la filantropía es distinta en otros lugares.
I'm speaking about my
En mi
experience
país
in
hacer
Chile,
filantropía es difícil
but the philanthropies in Chile is already very difficult.
porque para poder hacer filantropía yo tengo que pagar un 40% de impuestos.
Because to be philanthropist in Chile, I have to pay 40% taxes.
Entonces es muy difícil además hacer conservación,
Although it's very difficult to make conservationism,
que sabemos que es importante la conservación para cumplir la meta 30-30, que sí hay personas que sí quieren apoyar, porque se ve eso en Chile, sí tenemos un porcentaje alto de personas que conservan.
in Chile we have a high rate of people that wanted to support this kind of initiative, that wanted to invest and so on.
Pero llevo años escuchando también como cuándo va a haber una política pública o algo que apoye a los buenos proyectos.
But it has been for me many years listening or asking myself in the government and so on, when is going to be a public policy really supporting these very good projects.
Entiendo que a lo mejor en un principio la filantropía podría ser algo, podría tener algo de desconfianza,
I understand if philanthropy at the beginning could be something that people was
pero
not ready
también
to
entiendo que
trust.
nosotros podemos modelar y podemos hacer políticas
But I also believe that we can modulate
y buscar
and to make
soluciones
policies,
para apoyar, pero con fiscalización también.
and we can use this not only to support but also to execute it with fiscalization from the government as well,
Para caminar en una sola línea.
to go in only one direction.
Thank you very much, Francisca and David, to close this panel.
Oh my goodness, it's a big role. I mean, I was glad to hear that the talk about national level integration elicited such a big conversation. But maybe just to follow up on these comments too is, I mean, it is about money and resources, but I mean, for me, it's about this whole of society mobilization. Getting philanthropies involved is not just about here's the source of money, here's the source of inspiration. These are people and organizations who have taken their resources and devoted it to solving these big problems. It's not something they have to do. It's a commitment. It's a commitment to a better future. It's a commitment to being part of a solution towards society. So I think those comments just really inspired me that we should be looking at. And so they need to be full partners in this project. And I think the word trust that people elicited over the last little while is really important, especially in this time now, that where trust is low. Those of us who are in the intergovernmental process know that it's at an all-time low. It's the basis and the time to build that trust. So it's about those conversations. It's not just about the dollars and cents, but it's about the intent. Thanks.
Thank you very much, David, Francisca, Abdallah, Stewart, and Valerie, Bruce. All of you, well, we are sorry for those conditions, but the panel was recorded and everything is going to be able in the website www.xcs.tv. So we're going to finish this panel and we really hope to see you soon. Thank you. We are going to take a global picture and I get you.
Lo sacamos por favor. Quería poner la... Okay, thank you.
Muchísimas gracias por invitarnos.
Muchas gracias a ustedes.
Hasta la próxima.
Sí, siempre.
Thanks for joining me. Maybe I have a solution.
philanthropist of the biggest blessing. And then we have Tristan Janelle, Program Management Officer at the Secretariat of the Convention of the Biological Diversity. And I'm glad you're still standing after Kali. And thanks for that work. And then we also have Charlotte Mogensen, the Program Director of the Village Foundation, coming in online. But let me start by you, Celeste, if I may. So, how can and how is WMO contributing to the strengthening of the global governance mechanism and contribute with information that we all need to accelerate the achievement of the 30 by 30?
Okay, thank you very much, Natasha, for this introduction. And certainly WMO, of course, commends the 30 by 30 goals, which aim to protect 30% of the world's land and oceans by 2030. And as in this way, they complement the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, the Paris Agreement, and of course the disaster risk reduction. As you mentioned before, we need to unite in this, to face this triple crisis, often defined as the interconnected crisis between climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. But we need also to face and to embrace the fourth crisis, I would say, which is the inequality crisis. And all are interconnected. And WMO and myself as the Secretary General of the World Meteorological Organization, I would like to focus today on the climate crisis, of course. For us, it's the defining challenge that the humanity faces. Why? Because it has a cascading impacts on food security, population displacement, migration, health, energy, water. And it affects every single one of the sustainable development goals. So WMO has just published the State of the Climate 2024 update, where we say that 2024 is on track to be the warmest year on record, even warmer than 2023. And we have just had the 10 warmest years on record. And so we expect warming this year to hit 1.5 degrees. Of course, this does not mean in any way that we have missed the long-term goal of the Paris Agreement, but we are perilously close. Greenhouse gas reached record observed levels in 2023 also and continue to rise in 2024. The ocean food content also in 2023 was highest on record, and preliminary data also shows that 2024 has continued at comparable levels. Ocean warming will continue, and that change will remain for centennials to millennial timescales. It's completely irreversible in the timescales that we can track. Sea level rise is also accelerating. Of course, because of the thermal expansion of warmer waters and melting glaciers and ice sheets. From 2014 to 2023, global mean sea level rose at a rate of 4.77 millimeters per year. That was a rate that more than doubled from the previous decades. So this means that everything is accelerating, and this threatens, of course, the very existence of small island developing states, and of course by contaminating water supplies and disrupting marine ecosystems. The cost of climate action now is so much cheaper than the cost of inaction to our future. So that is why it is so important for governments to embed ambitious targets, including even the 30 by 30 in their national determined contributions. We have to have hope. The transition to renewable energy, for example, can offer us a cleaner and healthier future. It can improve basic socio-economic rights and also support the 30 by 30 goals. WMO is working to strengthen weather and climate services to support that transition. Artificial intelligence and machine learning have also emerged as potentially transformative technologies that are revolutionizing the weather forecasting and can make it faster, cheaper, and more accessible. So these are tremendous opportunities and also many challenges because, of course, we have inequality in data quality and availability and the access to machine learning. Of course, we need more capabilities in the least developed world to get the benefits of these new technologies. Again, cutting-edge satellite technologies and virtual realities that bridge the physical and digital worlds are opening new frontiers in, for instance, land and water management. We need a strong global governance to serve the global good. Enhanced transparency will also be important for building trust and developing standards for responsible use. Of course, of all the alternatives. So I would say that previously we were concentrated in natural sciences and social sciences, policy and society, but in a separate way. I think that now it's a time that is not enough. We need to embrace transdisciplinary approaches, bringing together diverse actors. We are here together gathering, including scientists, policymakers, philanthropists, practitioners, researchers, the social, the civil society, and of course including local and indigenous knowledge. Co-creating knowledge is for us a way to develop solutions that are relevant for local context. In an increasingly complex world, we must embrace diverse knowledge, experiences and perspectives to co-create solutions together. We must think out of the box. That is my message, and I would like to thank the opportunity to share this panel with my esteemed colleagues. Thank you very much.
All right, that's a good idea. Yeah. So strong global governance, information, trust, thinking out of the box, and then you also mentioned hope. Hope is not a strategy, but combined with the other, we can get far. Thank you. So Arsenio, IMO, International Maritime Organization, you have achieved some key progress in negotiations towards a set of binding global regulations on the IMO net zero framework. What's the next step?
Thank you for the invitation to the panel. I'll take it in two steps because there's a lot of emphasis, of course, that it goes into the work that the International Maritime Organization is carrying out right now to decarbonize the sector. The next steps are the finalization of technical and economic measures, meaning a pricing mechanism. We have a timeline to complete this work by October 2025 with an entry into force in April of 2027. With these measures, we won't only be supporting and stimulating the production of new and alternative fuels that will allow us to achieve the decarbonization by around 2050, but we also will be raising the required revenue to support, in particular, small island developing states and least developed countries to this transition. In the UN, we always refer to a just and equitable transition, and that's the work that the organization is carrying out in relation to the impact assessment of all these possible measures that we just completed with the assistance of other UN agencies, and this is where, whenever we talk about collaboration, I like to give the examples that would actually would allow us to finalize the process and meet immediately the first target, which is reduction of GHG emissions from shipping by 20%, striving for 30% in 2030, including the uptake of alternative fuels of up to at least 5%, again striving for 10%. It's a short period of time, but we have a good trajectory in relation to how we have achieved these goals of the organization. And since 2013, we have already introduced efficiency measures in the ship designs that then were further introduced to the existing fleet. So now we cover the whole aspect of the reduction of emissions. And it's not only on the designs and the financial aspect, but also on the practical aspects that we can introduce. And here, the very good work that the World Meteorological Organizations carried out in relation to advise weather information is something that we have been using but continue to promote further in the sector, because that would alleviate and assist in better route planning as well as enhance the operation efficiency of the ships, and at the same time is saving costs and reducing emissions. So all that in relation to how we are supporting the global agenda of decarbonization and meeting the targets of the Paris Agreement. Now, in relation to the topic of conversations here, which is how IMO contributes to the 3030, we have an array of measures that already have been proven effectively in protection of the oceans. And that's something that, as the users of the ocean, we take this very seriously. They normally don't hit the headlines the same way that the discussions on decarbonizations have. But with the CBD, as well as with the recently agreement on biodiversity beyond national jurisdictions, what we're doing is sharing the experience of how in shipping we have been adopting and introducing special areas, and particularly sensitive sea areas where we either reduce the speed of the ships when they trade in those sensitive areas, we divert shipping trade for those areas, particularly also because of the fragile ecosystems, the flora and fauna, and we also introduce monitoring mechanisms. And as we gain experience, we then can expand that into other areas. Right now, we're doing it in the territorial waters of the member states of IMO, and we have introduced more than 30 particularly sensitive sea areas. One big example is the Great Barrier Reef in Australia, was one of the first ones, as well as the Galapagos. The special areas for IMO are the polar regions in particular, and of course, there are more stringent measures and mechanisms that the ships need to comply with in order to operate there. And this is something that we're sharing into all the experience, the guidelines and the regulations that we have for the adoption of these areas, that of course will support directly the CBD objective of at least 30% by 2030, at the same time that we also, with these mechanisms, support the future establishment of marine protected areas through the BBNJ agreements. So those are the main aspects where we contribute directly to the 3030. And just to close with, because the ocean is one of those very key areas for us, every year we designate a particular theme in order to promote the work and contribute further. And next year is all about the oceans. And the theme is our ocean, our obligation, our opportunity, and it's in direct support to the second UN Ocean, to the third UN Ocean Conference.
I'm used to having the Madonna mic, so I promise I won't dance. But is that going to be on World Ocean Day next year? That we're going to see that theme playing?
The Madonna mic, or what?
Well, we take that too. If you come with the music, I'll dance.
We could do that.
All right. Thank you, Jim.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for actually having another climate person on the panel as well, which is talking about 3030.
And I'm just going to ask my question. Is that okay?
Okay, yes. Well, maybe I'll answer it.
Okay,
yeah.
We'll take. Else I'll ask it again. That's such a good technique. You know, how can IPCC contribute with science to the triple crisis and improve the governance? Because you come with science, it's good to have more with data here, but you do great work on that. So
I'll get there. I promise you. Yeah. So one of the challenges of being IPCC chair is you're supposed to be expert in everything. I've just come from a panel talking about just transition, and I'm moving seamlessly onto the 38 by 30 objective. And just let me confess, I'm not a conservation expert, but during the last cycle of IPCC, my working group managed the special report on climate change and land, and my eyes were opened about the complexity. I'm an energy person. I think energy is easy now compared with the land challenges, and of course we had the special report on oceans and cryosphere also in the last cycle. But one of the themes I had when I was campaigning to IPCC chair was of interdisciplinarity, and that had two dimensions to it. One was collaboration between our working groups and the task force and inventories to get them to work better together, but also with the triple crisis in mind, to think about how IPCC related to other assessments taking place under the UN umbrella. Hence, we do have a strong interest in the triple crisis. So I just want to, this is going to be a bit procedural, but let me talk about the kind of things that we've been trying to do to advance that. Now, first of all, we have now given jobs to all of the IPCC vice chairs, and these jobs are essentially as ambassadors to other organisations external to IPCC. So we're engaging more systematically with the other UN environmental assessments, but also, I should say, with the major constituencies here at COP. So our Vice Chair, Ramon Pix Madruga, has been assigned for liaison, for example, with IPBES and the biodiversity world, and Ramon represented us at COP16, the Biodiversity Convention in Cali. And we have also regularly engaged with that community at other previous COPs and at the subsidiary body that take place in June, and we will continue to do so. Secondly, David Abura, the IPBES chair, and myself have met on several occasions now in Nairobi and in London to talk about the issue about how we get better collaboration between the assessments. And let me not mince my words here, there are many barriers to doing that at an institutional level. We have different mandates, we have different structures, we have different assessment practices, and we have different schedules for producing our reports. So our conclusion is that we actually can make a lot of progress, but it's at the working and the scientific level that we need to develop this. There are huge overlaps between the scientific communities on which IPBES and IPCC rest. The same communities contribute to IPBES assessments, they contributed to the special report on climate change and land, and they also contribute to Working Group 2 on impacts, adaptation and vulnerability in respect of the natural world. So we share many scientific communities. So what we need to do is pay attention to cross-participation in scoping meetings, expert meetings, and in author teams. And that is something we can organise at the scientific level without going back to our panels. And we do, of course, have the precedent that we had a co-sponsored expert meeting on biodiversity and climate change back in 2020. So there is a history of collaboration there. And furthermore, I think we can learn from each other. IPBES has made more progress on the inclusion of Indigenous peoples and Indigenous peoples' knowledge. They've done quite a good job on that. On the other hand, IPCC has actually done a better job in putting together a glossary. It sounds very boring, but the incredible in-depth scientific arguments that we've had about our glossary items, we have a single glossary across all the working groups now, whereas IPBES still has a different glossary for every assessment that it carries out. So that's another kind of lesson that we can take forward. And I think my third point is I do think we remember it's not the double crisis, it's the triple crisis. And there is under development now a new panel on chemicals, waste and pollution prevention. And we do need to think systematically, I think, about the intersections between all of the three panels that will be working together. And I should say that, I myself have been consulted quite heavily about some aspects of the design of the new panel and what lessons can be learned. So the collaboration is there. Now finally, just to say, I think it's worthwhile saying some words specifically about Indigenous peoples and Indigenous peoples' knowledge. And we will be having an expert meeting on gender diversity and inclusion very shortly in IPCC, which will give consideration to the degree to which more representatives of indigenous peoples are involved in IPCC activities. And I will be bringing forward a proposal for a workshop tentatively entitled Novel and Extended Methods of Assessment, which will include the question of indigenous peoples' knowledge and how we more systematically include it in IPCC reports. And we hope that that workshop would take place before our first lead author meeting of the 7th cycle, which should take place about a year from now. So I hope that's given a sign. We are paying attention to this agenda. We are very busy at this, and as the 7th cycle matures, very pleased to come back and report on progress.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and also for bridging it between the science and people. One of the things about the triple crisis is this is also something where we combine things that people can also feel. We can feel as normal people. We can feel the weather. We can see the consequences. It's difficult when we talk in 1.5. And also, thank you, Jim. I was in a panel yesterday about the language. So, the glossary, wonderful. How many languages are we getting it in? And so we can involve the people who really need to be involved in this. Thanks. And now I'm hearing that we have a connection to Susan online. Susan, are you there? Because then I have a question for you. That's great. Hey, Susan. How can ecosystem restoration play an important role in accelerating the 30 by 30 goals? Basically. up, Susan. Thanks also for reminding us of the great term of the Rio Trio, and that the ecosystem restoration efforts are a great job created. It's right and it's smart. It's a win-win. Let me move on to Francisco. Okay, good. Your foundation has done excellent work on conservation of land and ocean, and also on bringing these fantastic people together in the same stage. What do you think is needed to accelerate the achievement of the 30 by 30?
Bueno, muchas gracias primero que nada por la invitación y por poner este tema tan relevante que hoy día es fundamental.
Thank you very much for putting this topic on the table by this panel, which is very important.
Bueno, quiero partir por algo que todos sabemos. Sabemos que estamos en una crisis que no solamente es una crisis ambiental, sino una crisis social, cultural, económica, política, de alimentación, de religión, de espiritualidad, de valores. Entonces entender de
I wanted to start my intervention by talking about the crisis that we are having not only on a social, cultural, political, economical, and spiritual level, as a way to understand where we are at this point.
Entonces, ¿qué nos está diciendo esto? ¿Qué nos está mostrando? Y lo que nos está mostrando es de que realmente cuando hablamos de un cambio de paradigma,
At this point, we are talking about the change of paradigm.
significa que tenemos que reinventar un futuro distinto.
We are confronted with the fact that we have to invent a different future.
Cuando hablamos de un nuevo paradigma significa que todo cambia. La educación, la política, la gobernanza, las decisiones.
And when we are talking about the future paradigm, we have to remember that everything has to change. Education, politics, the way that we are taking decisions and so on.
Sabemos que está muy difícil que podamos cumplir las metas 30-30 y no solamente eso, sino todo lo que hemos tratado de hacer en todos los
Um, yeah, so certainly COP16, which ended 10 days ago or so, was our initial stock-taking opportunity after the adoption of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which was in late 2022, which set target 30% by 2030. I also want to thank Susan for highlighting also the restoration target 2, which is also a 30 by 30 target within the framework. There is also a third one on financial flows, ODA, flowing by 2030. But Cali was the opportunity to consider where parties are at in terms of the setting of their national targets relative to the global ones, and the extent to which they have finalised the revision of their national biodiversity strategies and action plans, their NBSAPs. Now, for the NBSAPs themselves, it's a little slower than maybe would be ideal, given, as Francesca has just mentioned, the fact that we have no time, that implementation of the framework needs to be happening now, straight away, or as quickly as possible. But in terms of the targets, I think there's 120 parties have submitted their national targets. And certainly relative to target 3, the protected areas and other effective conservation measures target, there is clear ambition there. I would say that it is one of the more straightforward targets to achieve on a superficial level. We saw that with the Aichi targets, the targets that had the 2020 deadline. One of the few that was actually achieved was the protected areas target 11, where countries had to set, I think it was, if I remember off the top of my head, it was 15% of terrestrial areas and 10% of marine areas. And so there was achievement in terms of the actual designation of those areas. The issue was the actual effective management of those. And that is still very much a hindrance in terms of actually ensuring that this protection approach is effective and will help support the achievement of the overarching objectives of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework and putting us on track to the 2050 vision of living in harmony with nature. And so there is a requirement at all levels that everyone is working together effectively, cohesively, in order to do that. And so governments themselves at the national level are designating the right areas for that protection, that those who need to be involved in the management of that are effectively recognized, supported, resourced, etc., in order to actually ensure that the biodiversity within those areas and in the surrounding areas around those areas is effectively conserved and restored and sustainably managed. And that is part of the issue, is that too often these can be seen as very simple or relatively simple approaches, lines on a map, and then we have achieved our target, or targets as the case may be. And of course that's not necessarily the case. And so there is that, what's the role of indigenous peoples and local communities? What's the role of science and how we engaging with the science community within this? What is the role of the financial mechanisms that are in place, including philanthropy? And how are we ensuring that global and national level commitment is being met with local level action? And there is a disconnect between that. And of course, as climate change impacts are increasingly being felt and are projected to get even worse and more sustained, as the impacts of biodiversity loss, which for a long time has been overlooked as a major issue for people, are sufficiently being reasons are that they're all taken forward and put into place. So as parties now have come together in Cali, and yes, they have taken some very positive decisions in terms of some of the highlight ones in terms of the digital sequence information and trying to take that forward in terms of recognizing that the social economic value that we have taken from genetic resources and ensuring that those who have been able to help us recognize those and in a sense profit from those are to be sufficiently recognized and as such rewarded for that. But then also things around how we are recognizing and respecting indigenous peoples and local communities, their practices, their cultures, their knowledge, and how we are again respecting and supporting them in that, but also that we are giving them sufficient space in order to take forward their own practices and cultures so that we can collectively achieve these global targets that we have committed to. Within biodiversity and climate change, which is the area that I specifically manage within the Secretariat, we did have quite a positive decision that talks about the synergies between this process and the CBD, as well as others, recognizing the interconnected and interdependent crises that we are facing, recognizing the valuable role that IPCC has taken, and IPBES as well, of course, and trying to encourage further integration between these two processes, recognizing some of the challenges that Jim has mentioned. But also that the various forms of knowledge are sufficiently taken together and being built on in terms of leading to effective action. There are some things within the decision, though, that are quite challenging. There was one specific request that asked for us to provide guidance on managing ecosystems within a changing climate, which can be very superficial at a global level, but also extremely locally contextualized. And that is going to be a challenge, taking that forward into something that is meaningful. And again, it's engaging with the scientific community, with indigenous peoples, local communities, with civil society, with the various financial mechanisms that financial actors that are out there, to ensure that we're not just providing superficial guidance on this, but actually something that is meaningful. But again, the fact that we have extremely limited time in order to do this. Yes, the COP did not finalize all of its work. One of the key decisions around resource mobilization was not taken because of time constraints and all the rest of it. But overall, yes, it was a very positive outcome, a very positive COP, as a COP for the people, as our Colombian hosts has very effectively promoted. It was our biggest COP ever, including 200,000 people going through the green zone, as well as around 20,000 people registered, which I know relative to UNFCCC is very small, but relatively small. But I think it's also a very positive sign about the growing recognition of biodiversity of nature as part of our collective challenges that we are addressing, not least the climate change one. The question now is, how are we working together, all of us coming together within our respective skill sets and focuses and priorities, and aligning them so that we are ultimately achieving and effectively addressing the joint crises that we are facing, whether it's biodiversity loss, climate change, pollution, etc.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Tristan. That was a great bridge to our next online guests, Charlotte Monson. Do we have her online? Getting a nod. Charlotte? So Charlotte, from a foundation perspective, Charlotte, what do you think is needed to accelerate the achievement? What action do we need right now? We can hear you. Well, now we can. Yes, now we can. Thank you, Charlotte. And now I have been allowed to take off my moderator hat and put on my action hat. Because if we're talking about the triple crisis and governance and how to accelerate the achievement of the 30 by 30, we have not spoken a lot about people. But if we talk about governments are affected by people. And how can we engage the really many millions, if not billions of people in these subjects? We spoke a little bit about how, when the 1.5 degree becomes something that people can feel, see, live in working ways, then people engage more. But from UN Live, the Museum for the United Nations, what we do is that we work with popular culture to engage the many people in these issues. Not just at the planetary side, but also on the people side, of working values and goals. And I'm just going to give you a little example of something that in less than 6 months has mobilized tremendously. And I put a couple of words to it. So, look at this group. And we need the sound too. Can you start it over with the sound? Just stop it and then play it again with sound. And listen very hard because I can hear it there. Now with sound. And now with sound. Else I'll enact it. I've seen it so many times that I can act and dance it. All right, while they are working on the technique here, I'm going to ask the polemic question. Who's the oldest, most underpaid artist in the world? Okay, I'm going to release it. It's nature. Nature has never been paid for her sounds or anything else that she has until half a year ago, when you were live with musicians, creatives, environmental organizations, and public good foundations, to almost this. Okay, so now Nature is an artist on the biggest streaming platforms in the world. That means Nature owns her own nature sounds. When they are streamed, royalties go back to nature and conservation. We got 15 big artists from different areas of the world, different genres, to mix nature sounds into their music. When they are streamed, nature royalties go back to nature. In 2 weeks, Nature made it to the top 1% of artists on Spotify. And last week we hit 80 million streams. So we have now millions and millions and millions of people engaged in planetary issues. People who vote, people who buy, people who act, people who can look at how they transport, how they live, how they eat, how they engage. So now they are starting to look. It's new people who've not been engaged before. So sounds right is the initiative because it sounds right. It's nature as an artist. And when we want to accelerate action and when we want to reach the critical top, we need to get a lot more people. I think it's so impressive to see this panel and what you have managed to get together from different areas. And let's also engage the many people. And now I'm putting on my model.
Aunque sea 5.000, como estaba la primera vez, que igual algo se escuchaba.
Sounds like. So now I'm putting on my moderator hat again, and then I will ask the floor if there are questions to our esteemed panel. Yes, I have. Any questions? So, what is so impressive to see is how you manage to get so wonderful different organizations together. So if we look at what needs to be done, I think we cover the whole, from the science to the action to the on the ground. So how can the UN agencies, IMO, IPCC, and CPD work together to achieve the goals? And I'm asking this question having worked for 4 different UN agencies, and also knowing, truth be told, that it's not always that they work for it. And now you're sitting on the fence. How can you work to make this
One of the main areas, at least, that I'm taking at IMO in relation to how we work with other agencies is not to be so protective of our work. At the UN agencies, and this has to do also with the member states, the jurisdictional aspects, and the remit that each organization has, we tend to be quite protective and defend what we do. Because there's competition between the agencies, also when we go out to require the necessary funding, we're now coming to a realization, and this is a very recent conversation that we had just over 5 days ago, into how internally with all the agencies, we're going to start to develop a guidance for us to not to compete, but to help each other. Now, there are practical aspects where constantly we will see that cooperation. The Conference on Biodiversity in IMO shared a lot of experience and expertise when it comes to protection of the ocean, because we rely on their data, similarly to what we do with WMO. Without the climate data, the meteorological data, it's not possible for us to actually enhance it. The next phase is how we translate that into the different agencies at the member states levels, at the country level, to also be coordinated. And there is more work to do there, but I can tell you that we all realizing that whenever we say we're going to cooperate, is now the actions that we're going to actually put in place for that cooperation to materialize.
Sure, that actually brings me back to an even more fundamental question, which is what is IPCC and who actually owns it? Because it's not a UN agency, it's an intergovernmental body which is hosted by 2 UN organizations, WMO and UNEP. And I can't do this while I'm holding a microphone. I was going to hold up my fingers to create a triangle and say that IPCC is actually a triangle of interests. There's the 2 UN host organizations at one apex, there's the governments at the other apex, and there's the scientists at the third apex. And each of these groups think they are IPCC and own it. And they're all right and they're all wrong, because IPCC cannot operate unless these 3 groups collaborate. It can only work with the consent of all these 3 groups. So when we think about a collaboration, I think about, the first answer to the question was about institutional collaboration between the agencies. That is probably really quite hard for IPCC. And we constantly get pushback from some of our governments on collaboration as well. I mean, the IPCC collaboration has not always enthusiastically been embraced by all our governments, if I can put it as delicately as possible. Which is why when I made my introductory remarks, I emphasised the question of science-to-science collaboration between our sister environmental assessments. Because quite frankly, we can go and get things done without asking permission from upstairs to go and do it. There's many practical things we can just get on with because we share scientific communities. And that is the explicit conversation I've had with David Agura about how we move forward. We can make a lot of progress without changing our procedures, without doing very ambitious things upstairs, as it were. So that's what I'm enthused about. I just want to get on and do it, basically.
Thanks. Yeah, so Jim is absolutely right. Certainly as a convention secretariat of a party-driven process, sometimes the collaborations can be challenging because we need to have a mandate to go out and to do that. And certainly recognition of IPCC AR6 within CBD has been a challenge because certain parties aren't quite so enthusiastic. And we saw that even just a couple of weeks ago in Cali, where references to certain terms used by IPCC, there were challenges to whether or not we could necessarily use them within our process. And so that is certainly at an institutional level that can be quite a challenge. But having said that, on a more individual level and taking advantage of the fact that other agencies and other processes are at least looking at some of these issues from their own particular perspective can be very beneficial and something that we can build on. So certainly within IMO, and I should have mentioned actually the engagement with the private sector in my earlier intervention, but the fact that as a body that looks very much more so at private sector activities can be very beneficial, even if there isn't necessarily reference to IMO within a CBD decision on cooperation with other agencies. And with IPCC, certainly that can be quite challenging. But yes, the joint workshop between yourselves and IPES was quite well embraced by parties within CBD to a certain extent. But it's that sort of collaboration, even if it's not necessarily a sort of formally adopted or taken on board at a sort of a higher level, we can certainly take from that and use that as an opportunity for consistent messaging and hopefully engaging with people outside of what might be our little bubble of conservation people, but how are we engaging with the climate community, with the shipping community, etc., and looking at how we can take this forward, even if some of those collaborations might be a little bit challenging.
Thanks a lot. Well, I think it shows, again, protecting all the answers, a lot of the collaboration is between people and not activations. Not it's about people who say we want to do it. And until a high water, there might be barriers, but we will do it. Some of that was needed. And now we're sitting here, we're convened by Zoom like Foundation. So asking our colleagues from the system, what is it that the foundations can do for you apart from giving money? And asking Charlotte and Francisca, what is it that you would like to see happen from something? Right, we could say it again. Si no tengo la idea. ¿Cómo? A la organización. Bueno, en realidad podemos hablar de la experiencia. Y la experiencia nos ha dicho que hay algo, y quiero como ponerlo así como algo importante, que tiene que ver con las relaciones y los vínculos.
There is something that we have been capacitated to be very precise, designs, creative, the touch of the try to do that.
Claro, si nosotros queremos cambiar las organizaciones, si queremos cambiar el cambio climático, si queremos cambiar la empresa,
if we want to change organizations, climate change, companies,
¿cómo lo vamos a cambiar?
how we are going to do it.
Y eso tiene que ver con un cambio personal.
And this has to do with the personal change.
Yo creo que hoy en día la empresa o las organizaciones, así como las que estamos acá, IPCC, WMO, etcétera, etcétera,
What I'm addressing about the companies and the global as well as
lo principal es que entre nosotros no estemos peleando.
the most important thing is
Que entre nosotros no tengamos
they are the confrontations, they are
que realmente en la organización que estemos sea como una familia.
we have to see that we have something with each other, to be a family.
Cuando somos una familia, cuando tenemos un propósito tan fuerte como lo que estamos viviendo hoy en día,
When we are as a family, we have a purpose and strong place to live nowadays.
los equipos se cohesionan y creo que los desafíos se pueden lograr mucho más fácil.
And then we look at the things cohesion to itself, and we can reach objective.
Un ejemplo real es la alianza que llevamos con el PCC y WMO hace 5 años, donde realmente hemos podido trabajar de una manera liviana, lo hemos pasado bien, ha sido mucho trabajo, pero lo hemos pasado bien.
One of the success stories that I want to show you is the partnership that we have with Solari, with the IPCC, and the organization, which although we have been working for more than 5 years together, we can realize that we have a nice time collaborating together, and that nice time for us.
Creo que el éxito de estar 5 años trabajando con estas organizaciones tiene que ver con los vínculos.
And then the success of what we have been doing
Tiene que ver cómo nos relacionamos, cómo nos respetamos y cómo nos abrimos los espacios, cómo no competimos unos con otros, sino somos todos un equipo, somos una familia.
how we are working together, how we collaborate together, so how we see the work that we are doing on our organization in an organic way as a company.
Es importante también ver qué está pasando con nuestras familias en la casa,
It is also very important to see what is happening with our families.
para saber también cómo podemos trabajar con la familia que nos acompaña todos los días, que son las organizaciones o la empresa.
To see what it is going on with the other types that we are having, that we are working with.
Llegó el momento de no apuntar hacia adelante, sino mirarnos hacia adelante.
It is a time not to project on others, but to see in ourselves.
Thank you. Good. Yes. We're also just about to wrap up, but would one of you, Jim or Kristen, have a comment on what it is that's needed?
Okay, just very quickly, and to say, as somebody from Scotland, of course, I would always accept money, for doing things. But to answer your question specifically, I could see a specific role. For example, we in IPCC have the challenge of incorporating Indigenous people's knowledge better. The problem is that knowledge is not in a form which is readily accessible by IPCC. And something philanthropies could do for us is help by, for example, convening workshops or meetings, the output of which is in a form that IPCC could start to assess. So that translation process, I think, would be actually extremely helpful, and that is not about the money side, it's really in kind.
Thanks. And
So I think one of the advantages that philanthropies have is the convening power to bring people together. Yes, there is always the promise potentially of money that does motivate people to engage. But even if there isn't necessarily money on the table, it's that ability to bring together actors, agencies, individuals from quite a broad swathe of backgrounds and perspectives, and I think that's a real advantage that not just for events like these, but actually something that allows people to come together for more than just an hour and a half or just talking at people, but to have a real meaningful conversation and to try and bring that awareness and understanding on a more substantial level, even if it is with individuals, but then ultimately you have to start with individuals before you can change the broader system.
Thank you very much, and thanks to the audience for attentive listening to the panel for great points. As Francisca, you said, we stand with so many crises right now, and we have to deal with them. We have to invent a different future, changing paradigm, how we educate, how we organize, how we produce, how we live, and how we make decisions, and also how we collaborate. Because if we don't see this collaboration, and talking about triple crisis and governance, I don't want to add the word collaboration, because else we will never see the results that we want to see and accelerate. So just to say that this is not the end, it's barely the beginning. The conversation will continue, and the foundations will continue. Shalom, shalom, wrote me a message to Leah herself right now that the foundation will keep nudging and pushing and being there as friends and family to help see this through. So thanks a lot. Bring the message of the triple crisis and the need for triple action and triple ideas to the rest of the talk, because it's not only here it needs to be heard, it's across the whole green. So thanks a lot. Yes.
Oh,
cargando, check. Check, check, check. Check, check. Check. No, no. Check, 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 check.
Ya. Tenemos que inyectar también. Ah, no, técnicamente debería ya estar inyectado. Pues va. Voy a conectarme por Zoom. ¿Ya? Voy a conectarme por Zoom. Voy a hablarte por Zoom. Uy, ¿cómo veo el Zoom? Ah, dame un poco, Ricardo, dame un segundo. Estoy tratando de resolver acá. Sí. Ya. Richie, eh, eh, pínchame en el switch. El PowerPoint, pínchalo en el switch. Ya, ok. Ve si me escuchas en los auriculares. Hola Ricardo, ¿cómo estás? Hola Ricardo, ¿cómo estás? ¿Me estás escuchando en los auriculares, no es cierto? ¿Me escuchas bien en los auriculares? Ya. Ahora voy a ver si está ahí saliendo yo en el streaming, que eso es lo que tenemos que chequear. Yo debería estar saliendo en el streaming. Y si está eso funcionando, ya lo arreglamos y estamos listos. ¿Ok? ¿Se entiende? Ya. En el streaming, que eso es lo que tenemos que chequear. Está funcionando, Ricardo. Está funcionando. ¿Estás listo? Yo me escucho perfectamente en el streaming. Voy a salir del Zoom y para cuando te toque de nuevo, está todo configurado así como está y debería funcionar.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending this important event on the role of environmental philanthropy in the triple planetary crisis. You might not all be familiar with the work of Veloxfonden, so as a brief intro, let me just tell you what we do. We work to enhance people's lives and opportunities in a democratic and sustainable society. And we do this by supporting research and initiatives within or across social conditions, age groups, transitions in adult life, society and culture, as well as the marine environment. And when it comes to enhancing opportunities, we must acknowledge that this year is not just an opportunity, this is the year of action. After the UN Biodiversity COP16 in Colombia, we now set the stage for COP29 for the trajectory the world needs on climate change, as well as on nature and biodiversity loss and pollution and waste, which are closely linked. And later this month, the final negotiations on the plastics treaty will also be held. These intertwined global frameworks are, in essence, a master plan to create